from David Topman, who was due to lead this item, but unfortunately he's had an accident and is in Dunedin Hospital. So thank you to Nicola Holmes, our team leader of District Plan, who is going to lead this item, supported by Melissa Russo, our Manager of Strategy, and Wayne and I are here as backup. Yeah, thank you. David is waiting to be able to fly back to Hamilton so that he can be transferred to Waikato Hospital. He's fell 30 metres, so he's rather banged up, had a couple of rides in helicopters, head injuries, quite a number of stitches in his head, a broken thumb, broken arm, and lacerations.
Where was he?
Some remote pass near Wanaka, which Robert Brodnax did 20 years ago and said it was pretty treacherous, and yeah, so not for the faint-hearted.
So perhaps I'll just kick off. So firstly, thanks to that, Kirsty, and also thanks to Nicola for just stepping in, because our best laid plans have just gone a bit array with David's accident. But David had prepared this submission and presentation and submission. We did get an extension to lodge our submission to the bills, and so Nicola will just take you through the presentation and receive any feedback, and a draft submission will be circulated, no doubt. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor and councillors. I'll just take you through the slides. I'll take it that they've been read as well as the draft submission, and I'll just talk to them. I have a tendency to start talking too fast, so if I do, interrupt me, and if you've got any questions along the way, just stop me as well. So I guess we'll just go through what the purpose of the new bills and then the council's draft submission and where to from here. It's a little bit hard to see, but essentially the RMA is going to be replaced by two new planning acts. So we've got the National and Built Environment Bill and the Spatial Planning Bill. So there'll be two separate processes, but they will interlink with each other. So out of the National and Built Environment Act will come the National Planning Framework, which will set national environmental standards, and that will feed into the regional spatial strategies, and then that will also feed into the National and Built Environment Plans. So the National Planning Framework will guide the regional spatial strategies, which will in turn guide what's in the National and Built Environment Plan. So in that way, they are interlinked. Key differences with the RMA. So the RMA is very much an effects-based document, and it's very much about mitigating environmental effects, whereas the new acts will be about achieving outcomes. So it's more about getting positive outcomes. It'll also be guided by the National Planning Framework. So in essence, National Planning Framework is consolidation of all the documents we currently have, such as the NES for National Environmental Standards for Contaminated Land, the National Planning Statement for Highly Productive Land, and all those documents will be compiled together to constitute the National Planning Framework, which will then feed into the plans. It'll also introduce the regional planning committees, which will be established under the Spatial Planning Act, and these will consist of members from each of the local authorities within the region. So across the country, there are to be 14 regions with, so each will have a planning committee, which will consist of the authorities within that region. So each authority will have at least one elected member, and then there will also be two elected iwi or mana whenua representatives for that authority as well. So the regional planning committees will establish the regional spatial strategies, which will then guide the National Planning and Built Act, which will guide the National natural and built environment plans, which are essentially what will consist of the rules for the district to enable development. So they are essentially what will constitute the resource consents. So it's more of a top-down, so they're trying to create plans which address everything. So when it comes to consenting, there's a lot less issues, and it's more enabling. So there'll be hopefully less resource consents required and more permitted activities. I'm not even going to try and describe this. I think it just clearly illustrates how complex a new system is going to be and how they're all going to interact with each other. Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of the timeframes for the legislation, once the Natural and Built Environment Act is legal, the national planning frameworks have 6 months to be finalised, and from there the regional planning committees can start doing their regional spatial plans, and then from there they will have 4 years to make them active. So they'll have 2 years to get them in a proposed state, and then they have an additional 2 years to go through that hearings process to make them final. And then from there the natural built environment plans will be produced from the regional planning the committee. The special planning committee will produce the natural built environment plans, which will then guide the development and the consenting requirements. So we're looking at 4 years from when the committee makes a resolution to create the plan that will be active. And any appeals to, so the plans will be determined by an independent hearings panel, and so any appeals will be on points of law only. So in terms of the YPAR submission, there's some support for the new acts. So it creates an integrated outcomes approach. So it brings together district and regional elements into one. It gives greater effect to Te Tili o Waitangi, and it introduces those national planning frameworks and the regional spatial strategies. And some of the concerns of the YPAR submission is it's going to be very complex to implement. In terms of the outcomes trying to be achieved, there's no hierarchy set. So does enabling housing have a greater importance than protecting highly productive land? We don't know. It's taking away from the local level decision making, so it's more of a region based. There's no recognition of the existing spatial plans and the work that's been done to date in the districts. And there'll also be resourcing burdens. So in terms of costs, we'll have to cost the regional planning side of things, because each local authority has to contribute to those costs. But then there's also the human resources. So we'll have the spatial planning being prepared alongside the existing situation at the moment. So we'll have to have people doing both, because in that transition period, we'll still be working under the RMA and assessing things under that, but we'll have to have regard to the fact that these changes are coming into it. And also alongside the 2 acts we've currently got, or the 2 bills, there will also be the climate adaptation legislation, which will sit alongside them. And as of yet, we don't know what that will constitute and how that will feed into all of them. That's not working. I think maybe that's the end of it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I guess I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry, it was a very high level summary.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thanks. Yeah, it is really complex, isn't it? It's difficult to be able to foresee how they're all going to work together. Yeah. And you're obviously making that point in the submission. Look, I just wanted to suggest that include something else about the substantial ministerial powers that come with the National Planning Framework. Yeah, because it was the subject of an address at the RMLA conference last year, and this was a session that was delivered by Simon Upton, you know, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and he said that the legislation at the moment assumes benign intent towards environment, and really you shouldn't be just assuming that people are going to treat the environment well. In fact, you know, we've got a lot of history that says that won't happen. And so he was saying that the checks and balances and accountability that's going to achieve that protection have to be absolutely flawless when you've got such a complex system and you've got so much delegated authority that is with the minister. And I just wondered if you might be able to include that in the submission. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. A couple of general, I think the first one is probably more to Kirsty as well. You know, we're putting a lot of effort into our own Waipa spatial plan, which by the time that this becomes legislation, hopefully we will have adopted and we'll have a good sense of direction. What guarantee have we got that our spatial plan will be recognised and absorbed within the regional spatial plan?
We don't have a guarantee, and I guess that, you know, the point in the conversations that we've had previously that we're wanting to front foot to ensure that we're well placed and can advocate on behalf of our Waipa communities what it is we want, what's important, what our aspirations are for our communities. So for that then to feed into that regional spatial strategy process. But there is no guarantee, you're correct.
Yeah, but we will be better prepared.
Absolutely.
In terms of having our lobby and our representation.
Yes.
In that regard. So it's definitely a good move, I think. The second question is, I suppose, what effect, and we're talking about the future of local government, and we're seeing that all of that district plan is taking out of our control. That's going to affect our structure quite considerably, Wayne, is it not? Because we won't have any plan changes to worry about, but then again, what kind of function would the local authority have when it's all in a regional camp?
Yeah, it's certainly a valid point, and we need to be very mindful that the Waipa environment and all that we've strived for through our district planning in the past and currently is reflected in terms of the key issues in the new plan for the region. It's going to take some time before that plan is cemented down. You've got to get your regional spatial strategy sorted first. But yeah, certainly the characters, amenity issues, the things that are important to Waipa, our outstanding landscape character areas, all of those things will need to flow into the combined regional plan, and the ongoing commitments towards ensuring those matters are sustained through that planning process needs to be done through our representatives on that regional committee. So that's going to be important, and it may even be more important too to actually make sure that there's further feedback into that regional planning committee from a local level, so that that information is getting through. So I think that's probably the key issue there.
So we'll lose a bit of control on our priority settings, won't we? You know, as we look to the future.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We don't have, we're not managing this at a district level any longer. This will be managed at a regional level through these regional planning committees. It's going to be quite a powerful committee there in terms of the consideration of the district plan, the combined district plan and plan changes thereof.
And what will happen? Do we still need a team of accredited commissioners like we have internally?
So that's a good point. I can answer that one. I think
at a regional level, there'll be independent hearing panels. So I don't know how that will make out whether the accredited ones now can flow through and put their hands up for that one. I don't know.
yeah, certainly in terms of the consenting side of things, that remains and the monitoring of it remains at a local level. So we'll still be doing the processing the resource consents at a local level. They're not being processed at a regional hub or anything like that, and there's no intentions, as I understand, for that. So the decision making around those resource consents, they will still be at a local level, but we'll check that out. Yeah.
This local authorities implement and enforce.
Yeah, local authorities. That's right.
I think implement is the resources making the decisions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gary, you've got your hand up and been waiting patiently there.
Yes, if I could just make a couple of observations. I wonder if we could just pop back to that slide with the wiring diagram, please. So I have a fundamental concern with the legislation, and if you look at it in this diagram, and this is David Topman trying to figure out how everything stitches together, it's a very top-down type of planning framework, and any good policy-making process relies on the plan, implement, monitor, review type process. And I'm not seeing any of that in here. So whilst the edict for these plans comes to a large extent from the top down, we'll be still processing consents, but I really don't see that feedback loop. So a very efficient process, but I don't think it's a good planning or policy making process. So that's a critical element we'll need to feed through, because it relates, of course, to the point that Claire just made around checks and balances. The other thing I'd just like to say in response to Roger's comment is that none of this takes away the council's powers in relation to the planning that we do under the Local Government Act and the Four Wellbeings, which is very much the stuff of which Ahuaki is made. And so I'd like to then sort of reflect on maybe the plans coming through in this document, and indeed the LTP is very much being implementation type plans, whereas the critical nuts and bolts of the planning that we do at territorial authority level will remain within the Local Government Act, which is a very strong piece of legislation.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Complex is one word for it. Any other questions for Nicola and Wayne while they're here and with us? So in terms of your next steps, your slide there, you've got obviously in workshop today, finalise submission and lodge on 17th of February, and then report back to us on SPNP in March. So Lou?
You, Madam Chair. Just one thing that really concerns me is we've got a third of this missing. We've only got 2 of the 3 acts, and we're left in a scenario where we can only adjudicate on what we've got in front of us. But what does the Climate Change Act actually present? What is this going? Is this going to override, or is this going to be what sort of stimulant? What sort of emphasis is going to be placed on it? Do we know? We're sort of left.
We wait and see.
We wait and see. And I mean, this to me typifies a lot of what's been happening with central government. And it leaves us in a situation where, as resource commissioners, we are left with in a most impossible situation to make an adjudication in a situation like that.
RMLA conference, as if you recall, we had that big session on possible litigation that's going to come through from this plethora of new acts that are going to be introduced. And I'm just wondering if we're going to be, like we've got the RMA started off as a piece of legislation and then grew into this horrible monster, whether with the 3 different acts and all of the influences that are going to flow from each, whether we're going to finish up with another muggler's mess.
perhaps just to speak a little bit further to that, I agree totally with what you said, Councillor Gordon. And the big worry I have, as I saw earlier, that we're going to have the Environment Court making decisions, and they'll have test cases. Now that means that we could be tied up with legislation in courts and being used as a guinea pig to produce the legislation that they want. And that can be a very expensive operation for all parties.
Seem almost to be more questions than answers, don't there? Yeah. Thanks for that. That was yeah. Yes, indeed. Right, so that rolls us on then to our next workshop, which is Community Boards 2.0 Implementation Plan. Joe. Hi, Ange. Nice to see you there. Is it just me or is it cold? It's freezing. Can we? Yeah, come sit up.
Does anyone want to get back copies, because I know it would be a bit hard to sit on those microphones?
Can we have the heat turned up a bit?
Good morning. Gary and I are here today to talk you through the Community Board 2.0 recommendations, implementation plan. So I thought just in terms of the session this morning, if what we do is if Gary and I will talk you through the implementation as a whole, and then if we could save questions to the end, because with the implementation plan, it's a working document, so if we can give you a bit more of the detail behind the section, the different parts of it, and then if we can save questions to the end, that would be great. So just in terms of recapping, it was back in 26th of July last year that we came to you with the Community Board 2.0 recommendations, which came out of the Stephen Finlay report. who we, after, as a result of the representation review, got them to do a review of community boards. Just one of the things I think it is important to keep in mind when you're looking at the community board issue is to remember how they're set up. So they aren't territorial authorities. They are their own entity. They're their own unincorporated body. And so they've got their own autonomous decision-making power. They have got quite broad delegate powers that are set out in the legislation. And then they also have those delegations that are granted by council. So that kind of just gives you the framework of the entity. Just in terms of the recommendations that came out of the Stephen Finlay review, some of the kind of key highlights from that were that to increase the state and relevance of community boards, for council to reaffirm its relationship to the boards, to set up an oversight committee for the community boards, which is one of the things I will be seeking direction on from you today. For community boards to reaffirm their relationship to council and staff, to consider more narrowly defined delegations, and for community boards to engage with communities and mana whenua. So the structure of the table that you have in terms of the implementation plan. So this is, it's a living document, it's a working document. So it's kind of written and used as such, so it will change over time as things develop, as we try things, add things in, change things, tweak things. It's divided up into different kind of work streams, themes. So there is a number of actions that are kind of duplicate, but that's just also grouped under the theme. But think of it very much as a working document as opposed to, you know, a kind of sit down tabletop read. So we will just go through the different sections just in terms of, first one is training and support there. That was quite an important part of making sure we could set community boards up for success. So first one there is induction. That was a kind of key theme. And we have gone for a much more comprehensive induction this time. I think the last training we had 1 3-hour session, whereas this time they've had some time with Linda Hutchings. They've had Stephen Finlay here for a day. We have had a governance and civil emergency session, and we've also had a couple of sessions, 2 sessions with key managers and group managers and staff, where they've looked at Akuaki, the long-term plan, the annual plan. They've looked at all the, something in my throat, sorry, work themes from the key managers that are that they connect with. So that's what your likes of Brian Hudson for transportation. Who else have we had? We've had Martin Mould, Brad Ward. So some of the key groups that they interact with, the idea of having that induction session is we can kind of really set the scene for the community boards about what is happening at council for the next 3 years, because that's a really important part of them being able to set their strategic priorities. We are under the training and support. We will also be looking at investigating options for mentors. That's a kind of work in progress, that one. And then we've got a key theme that came out of the Stephen Finlay report was about, you know, keeping them abreast of that central government reform agenda. So there will be some material that will be developed at the councillor level in terms of reporting, and then we'll make sure that's fed through at the community board level, so that everyone's across those happenings. Relationships was the next one, because there was, as I said, a number of things that were connected with relationships that Stephen talked about the relationships from community boards to councillors and the relationship with community boards to staff. And one important thing was out of the report was council and all elected members giving new practice a chance to re-practice with support. So that's important. This is about giving time to practice this new regime. As part of the process, we'll be looking to have 6 monthly reports from the community boards to the oversight committee. So that'll be about when they are reporting on their strategic priorities that they develop. So you'll be looking at kind of, you know, how they're progressing with that. Are they achieving them, or are there other things that have arisen? And that's part of kind of really making sure we start to kind of open that two-way communication between the boards and council. And so it's about more, you know, that relationship with staff, more early engagement with community boards, getting them involved at a different part of the process, having them involved in some of those conversations that we're having with our community about different things like Aki or policies that we've got coming up. So bringing on board them with activities like that and developing channels for them to have that community voice. And we also, there's reality checking that, you know, that's about, but for the boards to put a lens over their proposed project. And I think part of that, you know, you'll see one of those other ones down the bottom is understanding KPIs and talking to them about the CE's KPIs. So it's really about, like, in terms of reality checking, like making sure that they know where council's really focusing its resources and its funds for the coming period. So that kind of helps them to kind of have a really good understanding of kind of what's going on here. So they know where council's putting the money. So then they can kind of put that reality check on maybe some of the ideas that they might have. So it's really about opening up that kind of two-way information flow, isn't it, Gary?
Yeah, I think that was key. It's not about input into the KPIs, but it's about just understanding those organisational priorities that flow out of them in alignment with that strategic direction. But there is also, stepping back, the opportunities like perhaps to have a question in the resident survey. So I guess it gives the community boards the opportunity to build some of their own intelligence gathering capability within there.
Right, and strategic priorities is the next big group there. And so after those sessions that the community boards have been having with the managers when they're talking about like what their work programs are for the next 3 years, that's about the boards getting together separately and kind of coming up with what their own strategic priorities are going to be for the coming years. And we've even suggested ranking those, so like priorities, because it's all about kind of, you know, where you're going to put your focus. And then kind of, and it's important for them to then come back and engage with councillors and have that discussion in terms of what their priorities are. It maybe, is there any more delegations they might need, depending on their priorities? There may or may not be. One of the things that came out of Stephen's report was this development of kind of maybe more focused delegations to kind of, and that's really about kind of priorities and kind of focus areas for the board. So that was kind of another key theme that came out. So it's about developing short-term, medium-term and long-term priorities.
Sorry, could I
that for that reporting in, and it would be about, you know, and one of the key focus areas would be reporting on those strategic priorities and things. And I suppose if maybe we will talk about a bit more, because I suppose there's two avenues, isn't there? There's the reporting against the strategic priorities, and then I will leave Gary to just provide some input on the piece. Do you want to talk about the PCG?
Yep, just before that,
Yep.
I think there's an opportunity here, not just to report back, but it's to bring issues back if
Yeah.
there are particular issues that aren't being resolved, or feeling.
Yeah, I was wondering whether or not there's an opportunity with that mentoring resource that you're going to have, whether they could bounce things off them about how to best present, like what's your opportunity here or what you're trying to get the outcome of, so that it's a process that's got more impact, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And I think, you know, one of those things that, you know, came out of Stephen's report was kind of that ability to look at that, you know, developing that ability to build the coalition of the willing. So, you know, there's definitely going to be working towards a different kind of process there.
Yeah.
Just quickly, Joe, I really think that the fourth point, or the third point it is to meet with councils to discuss the strategic priorities. You know, I think that's a great option. Okay, I think the ability to actually get and let us all communicate together, okay, of what their priorities are. Otherwise, as I say, we have your committee or your governance oversight. You do perhaps exclude some of the others out of it. I do think we need, because we all work in the community as well. And we might have more information, they might have more information.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, and definitely one of the key things coming out was kind of developing those relationships between community boards and councillors and community boards and staff. So it was, you know, so it's about getting that information flow going. So yeah, no, great. Yeah, definitely will be a feature. Did you want to talk about PCGs now?
So also just on that operation, we're just suggesting having a project control group or some sort of overarching group, not a committee of council, but a group that would involve the chairs and a couple of members, really from a perspective of process rather than issue. So there's bound to be things that don't go as we intended to, and I think it's the opportunity to have those offline discussions. So what's working, what's not, what resources missing, etc. Just around a collective table to do that. Maybe only once a quarter or something like that, but just to keep an eye on how things, how 2.0 is bedding in and working from a process point of view.
And the idea was that group being a kind of a mix of the community board chairs and some councillors and the mayor and staff to kind of provide that kind of broader overview perspective as to how it was kind of working from all angles, because it's a new process and you need to kind of give it time to bed in, and there will be tweaking as things kind of are implemented and you actually figure out that actually it's it's better to do it this way or that way. Or
how does that relate to the oversight committee you've mentioned?
So the oversight committee was within the so it would be, I think, SPNP or
which would direction, whichever
looking for that direction about what committee, but that would be to bring an issue, bring back particular issues or report back on
their strategic priorities and things.
So just trying to separate that process of 2.0 from the content, if you like.
Yeah, so whereas PCG would be more about, the induction process was really good, or actually I think it was missing that, or the staff resourcing seems to be good, bad otherwise, so there'd be quite a distinction, I think, between, so it's not a duplication, they'd be two different. Things. So just in terms as well, just to make sure that operational, it's a bit like what we talked about. It's got community board representation, big ticket items and matters of interest to community boards. That was kind of linked to that whole sharing of ideas. So it's kind of like, what are the board's priorities? And so they've been feeding that back to kind of not only councillors, but to staff, so that staff have got that picture of, what their work program is for the next 3 years and which things the boards are actually interested in being involved in and which things aren't such key priorities for them, so they can kind of focus their efforts in terms of staff can focus their efforts in terms of engagement with boards and are hitting the right projects and the right themes. We've talked about the fact that they've had a good induction in terms of strategic direction and role at Akuaki. We have got our oversight group manager, that's Kirsty Downey, who's already started working with the community board chairs and building that kind of relationship and providing them with advice and guidance. We will be having a look as part of this, looking at all the community board templates and realigning them and looking at how we incorporate their kind of strategic priorities into that to help them kind of do their own kind of reality checking on, is this kind of is something they said they would focus on, or is this something kind of new, and what does that mean for the other priorities that they said they were going to achieve? Do they have to take something out to be able to do another thing? So a lot more kind of focus on kind of that, getting the boards involved in, those big ticket items and matters of interest kind of early on in the process. But if we've got that two-way communication, then that should be a lot easier.
Understanding the sort of project life cycle and where the big opportunities to have an input would be for the community boards, say through LTP, LTP life cycle, especially getting, I guess, an early engagement again, rather than presented with a fait accompli.
Yeah, and that's about as well from the communication engagement perspective, having them as kind of down as kind of key stakeholders, so bringing them into the group a lot earlier on. And I think really we've kind of touched on talking about most of the kind of key actions that we're going to be focusing on, because I said some of them, it is a living document, so we will be kind of working on it and developing as it goes on. But that has really been the work that's kind of gone on to date to kind of try and get these recommendations that came out of the report implemented. And I think we've been off to a quite good start with the induction and all that process. So it's been quite good today.
Thanks, Joe. Mike.
Yeah, just got a question about the mentoring, because I think this is kind of key. Are you anticipating internal staff mentoring, or sort of a third party kind of mentor, because they're significantly different? And I just observe that I think probably Kirsty, you've almost been doing a mentoring role on what I've observed recently, which is entirely different to a sort of Stephen Finlay type mentoring role. And I think we need to be clear about what that mentoring is going to be.
Yes, we do, and I think that was kind of one of the things, was to kind of complete the induction, and then like mentoring was going to come really kind of after that. Like it could be that we were able to get someone external to provide that support there. Obviously Kirsty will be there as the oversight GM as well, to provide some advice kind of about what's going, but it might be that there's a need for someone else external as.
Yeah, I think if you're going external, you're probably likely to get sort of effective advocacy from your boards. That could be a pain in the ass, but that's what good advocacy is. There's a degree of that. Whereas at the moment, where you're using someone from the senior exec team, you're much more likely to be getting sort of, smoothed over engagement, so that it's not ruffling feathers, but it's all part of the team environment. And I think they're two sort of different paths, and you need to be pretty clear on which way you're encouraging your community boards to go.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So
I'll be doing exactly the same thing. My button on. So from a community board perspective, yeah, it would probably be nice funding dependent, obviously, to have a mix, because I think it's really important that we build a good relationship with Kirsty. And it would be great if she is available for us to approach without working her too hard, because she's got lots of important things to get on with. But I think that from my perspective, it'd be good to have that balance, because there are times where we should be encouraged to challenge the status quo on behalf of our community, but to know how to do it well, articulately, and in the right way, not coming at it from probably a more emotional perspective or a hardcore line that I think we could possibly have fallen into in the past. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the internal mentor role is probably would put Kirsty in a real conflicted position, and I don't know that that's fair. So yeah, obviously some work to do in terms of that mentoring space, who and how. But I had a question about, and it was something that we touched on in our earlier session this morning with elected members around, is there a specific role that you see for the councillors that sit on the community boards to have? And I mean, I guess it's kind of two parts. Like, I guess as councillors, we probably want to try and understand what we want from them, what that role looks like. But then on the other side of the table too, it might be that community boards have a different perspective as well about their roles. So I'm curious to understand if there's any discussion around what that role looks like in terms of the expectations of those people. Having sat on it for 6 years, it's a tricky spot to be, because you find yourself, didn't we, Lou, constantly just saying, I can't, I can't make a view because I'm sitting around the decision-making table at the end of the day. So it's a tricky spot to be.
Yeah, and it's for the two councillors sitting on the community board reporting back to the council elected members here, and what format, and keeping them interested and focused on community boards, for their success as well too, future success. Just how do you see that reporting back being done in that format? What meetings do we do that in?
Well, there will be the 6 monthly reporting in terms of the strategic priorities. That will happen. I mean, it is a very tricky, it is a bit of a, not without its problems, like something, for councillors sitting on community boards, and then with all these things that are, what submissions and things like that, it doesn't kind of create the ideal, scenario. So it's really about that information flow between the two, and bringing that back. And there'll be, not only that, opportunities at the 6 monthly review, but like if you've got things that, a particularly hot topic in your community board space, there is time that you as councillors have together that you just might, it'd be good to make the other councillors aware of any kind of particular kind of topical concerns that, you feel that the others need to know about as well.
I think there's also an element, it's not an easy role to fill, I think, but there's an element there that around that strategic intent, and being able to sort of convey that to community boards as well, that that just keep that direction of council in community boards' minds as well.
Because it was thought that reporting back to the elected members, we would do that through SPMP, just in a quick bullet point format rather than whole essay. You're saying 6 months, maybe potentially 6 months, but do we just do it when there's something topical?
Well, we can all kind of look at what you want. There will be the formal 6 monthly reports. There will be that opportunity that you have each month as councillors sitting around together to talk to each other about issues. There will also be things that come through from the community boards as recommendations, which the board has decided. I think if it evolves that there is a need, maybe that 6 monthly reporting should be 3 monthly or something. I think it's one of those things that we need to just kind of keep an eye on, like, and you can kind of check in when you get your reports. Is this reporting, does this feel enough? Does it feel too much? Like, it would be better if it was every 3 months, or, I think as things kind of evolve, it's definitely going to be something we need to kind of keep an eye on, like the reporting, how often, what vehicles and methods we use to do that, and kind of what's working for everyone.
Just quickly through you, Madam Chair. I really see that there is a conflict with the community board and with their councillors, because councillors actually represent Waipa.
Yeah.
Okay. The community board just represents its own local area. So we've always got to take consideration of the whole of our district at all times, because that's what we're actually signed up to do. And quite often we're privy to information within that infrastructure that we can't actually release fairly because it's still in draft or it's still being discussed. So yeah, there is quite a bit of a conflict there at times.
Well, I think Jo's got her hand up, hasn't she? Yeah. And I say, is that you, Jo? Yeah, she's iPhone. Oh, look at you.
Apologies that I'm not there in person, everyone. Got 3 school-aged kids at home, so I'm afraid I'm zooming in. I just wanted to, just a few things, say I really love the idea of the project control group. For me, anytime there can be that strengthening of that working relationship between community boards and council, for me is where we will kind of do our best work, you know, less of a us and them and more of kind of working together, serving the same, you know, community in slightly different ways. And I've really appreciated Kirsty's guidance to me since I became the chair. She's been really wise counsel and has helped me with a few issues. So I have really appreciated her guidance. And the same with having Mike and Phil on our board. They both have been on the community board before. So they both have that really good insight. And having them with that clear link to council is really helpful. And especially Mike, he's got really good ideas about, you know, just being encouraging with the community board and saying, hey, this would be a great opportunity for you guys, or why don't you think about doing this? And just kind of that motivating voice. So for us, it's really awesome having those councillors there, and they're a great addition to our board. And just a comment about the overall implementation plan. It looks really positive, and it's certainly great to see everything outlined like that. Feedback from the other board members is the induction this time has been really concise and really helpful. And we've really appreciated all of that extra feedback, especially from Stephen. I think that was my last point. Yeah, but certainly the project control group is something that's really exciting.
Thank you, Jo.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yeah, Roger.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Having spent a little bit of time on the community board before coming onto the council, I'm a believer in the function of the community board acting as an advocate for the community. And I remember well the open forum times that we had before the meeting, the formal meeting. But some of the frustrations that we had were because that is an informal and non-minuted session, we were unable to make any actual decision within the meeting that was actually minuted, which actually to a degree meant that that forum perhaps didn't have the outcomes that would have been suitable. I'm just wondering whether has any thought been given to how you can increase that relationship with the community that drives advocacy. Make myself?
Yeah, I think just in terms of that public forum, because we're running our meetings with, you know, standing orders, and the only thing that can kind of happen in that public forum is kind of questions and answers, and no decisions. Like part of that is also linked to, you know, Lagoima, because actually anyone in their community should be able to look at any agenda and say, oh, I know I'm talking about, someone's talking about that topic today, and it's about parking in the main street, and I'm going to make sure I get along to that meeting because I can tell it's about parking on the main street, and they're going to make a decision. So I'm going to make sure I've watched or I get along to that meeting. Whereas if you, so that's why we have our reports for your decision-making thing. So if we were to start community boards making decisions in public forums, you're kind of going against that, not only standing orders, but those kind of principles, which is kind of your public should know what you're talking about at a meeting. So what in that scenario, when someone comes and wants to public forum, it's about then making sure, you know, we've got time for the board to look at, say, hey, actually, that thing that, you know, came up, I think we really need to do something about that, and kind of saying to, like, looking at how you might do that. Is it going to be a feature of the chair's report next time to say, actually, you know, we need to be, you know, Bob Kanan, we talked about the parking in the main street. I want this a feature of my chair's report. I'm gonna talk to governance. Can we get a report from Brian Hudson and the agenda? And so then it becomes an agenda item which you make a decision on, and then everybody can see that, you know, parking on the main street is a topic, and if they want to come, they can. So it's that principle of your public knowing what you're talking about and deciding what are your meetings.
Cambridge board did grapple with that in the last term because of this. As you say, you know, we can sort of see that the board can see that public forum things weren't going anywhere really. So it sort of set aside time at the end of the meeting to say, well, what do we do for each of these? And as Joe said, you know, does it need to come back to the community board meeting, or can it be handled by a CRM or something that can be put through to council? So it was just a way of triaging all of those public forum issues.
Yeah, because they are important.
The meeting.
People have made the effort to come and talk, so it is important that we're kind of making sure we've got some mechanisms for, you know, those issues to be.
Through you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question on that, Joe. Rather than having to wait to the next meeting, just to show that we have acknowledged the community and support the idea, is there any way within the standing orders and the Act that we could have a place on our agenda that enabled us to be able to make a recommendation to request further information, so that it shows we're doing something? You know, it was sort of one of those things that we raised through, that often it feels like there's a lot of stuff we do in the background that it doesn't look like we do anything. You know, like you read the agenda and you go, oh, that was a riveting meeting. When there's often lots of questions being asked, and, you know, like we talked about that, having a space to have things that we've put back to staff answered so it can be included. Would there be the possibility, just say someone comes to us and it's a really neat idea, that there's a little space that we can discuss what came up in the public forum, and it's a simple recommendation of making a request for further information about this to see if it's worthwhile being more, you know, doing further work on it?
Yeah, it's supposed to be a question and answer. So I think that I'd space at the end of the meeting, after the meeting is closed, is a good idea. But it might be in terms of that person that's come along to talk to you, quite a nice, a good addition to kind of add into that person. Like governance can email and say, you know, Bill came along and he you know, the community board recognise that this is an issue, and they've requested a report from staff that is going to appear in the next agenda. To kind of close that loop with the person that's spent the time coming into the meeting to talk to you. So we can do that just through that, because, you know, it's we can have that input in terms of developing the, you know, the agenda without the need for any kind of formal resolutions, which we can't do in that public forum. It's sufficient for you to let the staff know what you would like reported on.
Okay, thanks.
Any other points of discussion around this implementation plan? No? Cool, awesome. Okay, I think it's fair to say that we've had some different sort of scenery with these community boards over the years and at different points, but I think that the work that's been done here definitely points to a better way to engage with each other. I'm particularly excited or pleased to see that they're in that relationships and training space. Oh, my thing's cut out, so I can't do it now. There's going to be a greater understanding at a community board member level around the actual workings of the life cycle of an issue in this place. I've always said things take a long time here. It's like dog years, but slightly longer. And I guess I understand that a lot of the sense of frustration that community board has felt has probably come from the lack of really understanding or being able to get into the part of the organisation to make stuff happen. So I think that's a really progressive and positive place to start, on top of all the other things you've got in there. So no, it looks pretty good to me. Well done.
Thanks.
Cool. I believe that's that then, and we're breaking for lunch. I've got on my schedule here that we start again at 12:50, which should be about right, I think, by the looks of it, for our police